Good evening, and thank you for coming tonight to the first of our 11th annual Great Presenters Series. It's my privilege to introduce Evan Hadingham, Senior Science Editor of Nova on PBS and a Wayland resident. For over 2 decades, Evan has had editorial responsibility for developing ideas and overseeing the science content of all of Nova's documentaries and special series. He ensures the editorial accuracy, evaluates ideas for new programs, and works on the storytelling aspect of each episode. Evan is the author of popular books on archaeology and prehistory and has written numerous feature science articles that have appeared in National Geographic, Smithsonian, Discover, and elsewhere. His most recent project is a book on the 50 greatest discoveries in human origins, commissioned by the Leakey Foundation. So thank you to Evan for agreeing to speak tonight. Please join me in welcoming him to the library.
How's that? Here? Okay, great, sure. Well, Nova's been on the air. We're now in our 47th season, which is kind of mind-boggling. That's longer than Seinfeld. The only series that's older than us is General Hospital, and there I think I won't draw the comparison any further. We make about 23 new one-hour shows a year that go on PBS and get about 4 million viewers each week at the moment. And our web presence is very strong. We get over 1 million visitors to the Nova website, and we're putting a lot of effort into those resources. But of course, it's a much more challenging media landscape out there than it was when PBS was just and 5 other networks was the only game in town. In the heyday of cable, it was of course 500 or 600 channels, all competing for attendance. Cable is now in an eclipse, and there's an even more bizarre choice of things for everybody to get distracted by on their little set-top boxes. And of course, it's true now that there's a whole generation of millennials that doesn't watch TV anyway, because they're watching on all manner of devices at all times of the day or night. So this presents to the world of science communication and, of course, correct political news, all kinds of complications and conundrums that we could talk about later on. Just to some degree, we hope that at least to the generation that knows the brand, that our brand conveys in itself a certain measure of editorial quality control. But we work very hard to keep that image going, partly through our expansion into the online world. And of course, in this environment, how do you get attention without kind of selling out and making things too sensational? And that's partly what I want to explore tonight. The plan for tonight, what I'm going to show you, it's an excuse to show a lot of fun clips, hopefully. And what I want to do new season, quite imminently. Are we going in? Is that better? Okay. I can also, people say, you got to make this talk personal. So grudgingly, I will at some point talk about the bizarre route that brought me into this situation. Out of those 47 years, I've actually spent a total of about 30 years now. I was horrified. 3 decades, with a break of 4 years in the middle of it, where I went to start up a series for the competitor, the Discovery Channel, which was a very interesting experience. that I could tell over a beer sometime, but it's probably not. I'm going to actually start off by looking back to a couple. People often ask, well, what's your favorite shows that you've done over the years? And so I'm going to touch on that to begin with. But first of all, just a couple of words before we get to the fun clips about the challenge of doing science on television, the subtleties of science. Because TV is this very raw, emotional, emotion-driven, story-driven medium. And you're extremely lucky in any 1 hour of television if you can get across 3 or 4 big ideas or processes in any way that will stick in the mind of the viewer. So that's a problem in itself. How do you communicate complex subjects like climate change, when you have, basically that limits to what the audience can absorb. And it is, as I said, it's this emotional medium, and really the rules of storytelling haven't changed much since most stories break down to 3-act structures where you have a powerful beginning, the hero or whatever face a conflict, and then well, the problem isn't like that at all. Instead of resolution, science is an open-ended process. Theories are continually modified and changed. So that presents some problems. How do you cover certain topics? Well, you could say we'll do a survey of say, challenges to dealing with climate, and we'll look at this and this and this. But that gets to be a very bitty chopping up of your attention, and hard to hold people's through that kind of through line. And this need for example, if we do take on, let's say, as we in Nova at the start, pose a really big mystery or big question or a big idea that we're going to explore in the next hour. Well, you have to have some progress. Obviously, sort of a no-brainer, but you have progress, upward trend in the discovery and understanding, because you're not going to make your viewers sit through 50 minutes and then at the end end with, well, maybe no, we're still doing things at the screen. If you do that, you're wasting. And there's an interesting maxim that my job, that even our most compelling favorite storytelling, great visuals, are really compelling. There's always this moment about 40 minutes into this great story structure. I mean, that's a challenge. How, one story, an hour, 50 minutes is an hour, a lifetime on television. There's always this point about 40 minutes in when you can safely go to the refrigerator for a beer and you want to miss a thing, essentially. So, that TV also demands visuals and action. And yet, a lot of the most important developments in science are invisible, such as genes and far-off cosmological things. Well, cosmological things you can glimpse through photography. But the point is, indeed, climate change is another one, of course, notoriously difficult to deal with. It's invisible, long-term threat. But TV is also an opportunity because of things like computer animation and ways that you can explain the process of science. And a fundamental belief that we have at NOVA is that you must show how scientists know what they know, that the audience will keep with you and will follow you if you don't try to skip over things and assume that or do hand waving and move on to the next thing. Because we found time and time again our audience really appreciates, we've done a million archaeology shows, for example, with radiocarbon dating. And each time we do a little bit of explanation of how it works. We just feel you have to you can't assume that people know stuff, okay? Interesting thing is that we're now expanding into these short videos for online, which we're now cranking out regularly for social media, videos that are maybe 3-4 minutes long. And there the rules are totally different to the 1 hour. You don't have any of those huge structural problems. And there you can often just play a particular scene with some engaging bit of visual. And it is fine for you to say there, well, this is promising. We don't know where it's going, but stay tuned. So that's a little opportunity in itself. And as I said, it's a completely different viewing experience. You can make them very cheaply. We have, a little unit that cranks these out, twice a week, where we try to hang something from the local headlines with a science angle on it, and we'll grab footage, public domain footage from the internet, throw it together in 24 hours there. And these are very popular. So there's a fascinating... Hello? There's a fascinating disjunction between us white-haired individuals on the broadcast side and these incredibly creative young kids who there's almost, because of our bad office design, there's like a frontier between the two. And these kids are so creative. It's really inspiring. Okay, well, what we find is that, as I said, if we adopt these storytelling approaches, strong visuals, explaining how it works, and good stories, combining entertainment value, always looking for the good personal story, that you can serve up really demanding subjects to the audience. In fact, the Nova audience likes really geeky stuff. And the most extreme case we did last season was a whole hour on quantum entanglement, which is the most fiendish and impossible to understand topic in the whole of science. And yet somehow we managed, I think, to not leave the viewer totally and utterly baffled, but told a nice historical story about it, which fortunately I'm not going to show you a clip from that tonight. Will be. Well, what's my favorite Nova? It's a funny thing, but I was thinking about this again today. And I do a lot of archaeology, but the show I have a really soft spot for was called Volcano on Fire, that came out a year ago. And this was a show about the least known and most dangerous of Africa's volcanoes, which is situated, unfortunately, in the DRC, which is, of course, the site of the worst civil conflict with the most casualties of any conflict, I believe, since the Korean War. And it's right on the border there with Rwanda, so it's got, serious unrest. And the volcano itself has some serious unrest, which they don't understand. And the BBC were going to go ahead with a project they were proposing for a 2-hour special in this very uncertain, access totally uncertain, up for grabs. It was very expensive, high-risk project for us. But I took a look at the visuals of this place, and then I read up the science, the wider significance, because this is on the Great Rift Valley. And if they can understand how this big system works, it may eventually, in time, literally unzip the eastern western halves of Africa, and a new ocean will form in between. So there's some very fascinating stakes involved in this story. But it took about 2 years' worth, in which I steadfastly defended this show. Yes, we should take the leap here against a lot of skepticism. And thank goodness we were lucky. We got great access. And it has, I think, the most pulse-pounding 6 minutes or so near the start that really gets me going no matter how many times I see it. So it's a show I'm proud of. Let me just give you a tiny bit of background. This is the volcano involved is called Nyiragongo, and it's right up in the range of hills where the famous mountain gorilla colony that was studied by Diane Fossey was. And it's a 1,000-feet mountain that overlooks the capital city of Goma in the DRC. We're 1 million people down there. And it's erupted twice in 40 years. And in 2002, 3 great streams of lava came out of the flanks of the volcano and charged, very viscous, very runny lava, charged right through the streets of Goma, and killed 100 people. So it's a significant threat to this sprawling community. So the BBC decided to do this special, risky special, around a cutting-edge team of Belgian geologists, and because we were the co-production partners, we insisted that we get some Americans on board to make this more of a rounded thing. So there's a geologist, Kayla Yakovina, that you'll see here, and we also wanted some diversity in the show. Really lovely British geologist, not African American, Caribbean, I guess is the right, whatever the term is, who had no climbing experience, and their first job was to climb up for 6 hours up the 6,000 slopes of this gigantic mountain in chilling mist. And they then stood on the crater rim. We're going to join them on the crater rim the next morning as they look down into this cavernous crater. And there is the world's largest lava lake, bubbling and seething. It's 1,000 feet across, and it's like a vision of Dante's Inferno. And it's intermittent. Sometimes it's on, sometimes it's off. And they're studying it with drones and all kinds of chemical analysis, because they hope that that activity will give a clue as to what's happening with the rest of the lava that's stored in the flanks that came down and really wiped out the city. So that's where we're going to join. We're going to join them at dawn. Let's see if I can get this thing to start up again. And you're going to see this group was, the scientists were being instructed in survival by a member of the Royal Marine, a real tough guy, tough Scottish guy called Aldo Keen. And boy, did they need him. I got sound. Yeah. Why would that go to sleep? Oh, it did? I moved it. It's my fault.
I'll try that again.
Great. Okay. That's the lava lake.
First light on the crater rim. The priority is to get down to the lava lake as soon as possible. The weather conditions are, but at this altitude, it can get worse.
honest with you, yeah.
For Chris,
Nice and gently.
who's not an experienced climber.
Oh. Oh. How's it feel? I've just come out.
Such a remote location. Wrong. There are no teams, no helicopters to take an injured climber out.
Try not to do that because there are sections if you do that the whole slope will go. Yeah. All of this is just waiting to go. That wind's just picked up. Yeah, I can feel it. Be careful not to kick anything. If you kick anything, it's coming down on my head. Yeah, okay. Everything's moving. Nothing is stable. Ah! Oh, Jesus. Sorry. Have a look back up. Oh, yeah.
Up a little. I think it's maximum. Oh yeah.
Okay.
With the weather holding, the rest of the team.
Just watch your feet coming down.
Chris is more than halfway down and about to be lowered down about 250 feet to the campsite below.
That's where we're heading to the base camp down there. Okay. Okay. First it's going to be Chris, over.
To do this safely, Chris is suspended on what's known as a Larkin frame,
Get yourself comfortable. Don't worry.
a piece of gear brought down by Aldo and his climbing partner Daz during preparation for the descent.
Thank you, bro. Okay. Chris is down. Thanks, Dad. That's very good. Oh, too intense. Don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back.
Now, around the same time in 2018 that this came, we've been doing a strong to the underserved in our communities, and this was an important special simply called Addiction, which was about the opioid epidemic, and it looked at the perfect storm that there is out there at the moment. I mean, before we really got into the research, I had no idea the scale of the devastation that's going on in communities such as the coal belt in West Virginia, where the people are constantly injured, and we actually visit that community and do a portrait of some of the tragic stories. self-destructing from opioids, stepping stones to heroin, and the synthetic heroin, so deadly it's 50 times more powerful than heroin, and the equivalent of 2 grains of salt will kill you. And this is coming into of coal. And scientific interest, which is often portrayed as, and people get turned in the case explain what the science of addiction really is, and how the fact that it is a disease and an eminently treatable condition. It's not a moral failing, which is still this tremendous prejudice out there that you know, a shaming and stigma about people that get hooked on. So crippling when you try to go cold turkey, and you know, get people sorted out after, you know, a period of therapy, but put them back on the street with no kind of backup follow-through treatment, so they would relapse. I'm just going to show you the tease, the 2-minute tease about this show. We tried to balance a portrait of this appalling tragedy versus this positive message that science does have answers, and that enlightened policies, public social policies, can help too.
A devastating epidemic. We just didn't know what to do. We just felt powerless. A parent's worst nightmare. To find my kid not breathing.
He was always very good at telling us, Mom and Dad, everything's going to be fine. But it wasn't.
Addiction is ruining lives and ending them too soon.
Overdose is the #1 cause of death for people under 50.
We are racing against time. We have the equivalent of a Boeing 737 crashing every single day.
But what causes addiction?
Individuals struggling with addiction are actually battling millions of years of evolution, because our brains are exquisitely evolved to seek rewards.
It's those cravings, the inability to stop.
A dangerous cocktail of biology and medicine. Made deadlier by a drug 100 times more potent than morphine.
Fentanyl is super toxic. So you get a batch that comes on the street that's a little bit hot, and on those days, it's like bam, somebody's going down, bam, somebody's going down, bam.
But can new treatments offer hope?
We have extremely effective medications that are life-saving. This is a very treatable illness.
The solution to this is for us to embrace addiction as a disease, to bring it within the house of medicine.
People recover from addiction. Nobody is unreclaimable. The only thing that you can't recover from is death.
Addiction, right now on Nova.
The best part about this project funding for outreach, and in fact had screenings in more than 80 different communities right across the U.S., some of which continue. And there was a screening at the Mass State House, one at the National Archives in D.C. This show really got a lot of public and sort of high-level political attention. Interestingly, I was talking about how our shows now live on beyond the broadcast date. And so the pickup on this show on streaming online was really incredible. There was more than 90,000 pickups of the digital stream. People, as they do now, can watch the show on Facebook simultaneously as to when it goes out on the broadcast. And there are people watching it over Facebook. So it just shows you that people are willing to engage with such serious and grave topics if you present it in a way that's dramatic and has some kind of redemptive aids to your understanding. Okay, well, let's now quickly to what I think are the two best shows of our upcoming season. Actually, they're coming on very, very shortly. And an easy pick. It's one of the most beautiful films, I think, and well-told films that Nova has ever made, and it's called Decoding Da Vinci. I could say it in all lack of modesty, because it wasn't my job. It was this brilliant producer in New York, Doug Hamilton, that it's a true masterpiece of good storytelling and beautiful visuals. And I think it's the best show that's ever been made that shows how Leonardo da Vinci combined science into his art, and the two were absolutely intertwined, and that without the incredible scientific curiosity that da Vinci had, his paintings would have incredible allure that they do. And so Doug took, what seemingly would be the most banal sounding approach. Let's look at the Mona Lisa, and the entire hour deconstructs the Mona Lisa, but it's not the Mona Lisa you're familiar with. It kind of reveals through a whole battery of analytics the amazing development of human anatomy, technical skills. Look. So I'm going to show two little clips from this, and the first one is really just an introduction to his amazing notebooks that are crammed with these futuristic inventions. And this experiment that has never been done before, futuristic bridge.
Of his notebooks.
These are not books. You cannot compare that to a work by Galileo or by Newton, because they have solved the problems before writing their books.
Paolo Galuzzi is the director of the Galileo Museum in Florence.
What we have in Leonardo is the direct expression of his internal dialogue.
Leonardo's notebooks span his lifetime. They even come pocket-sized.
We're sure that those 6,000 pages that we have are by him, and this is just 1/4 of what he actually penned. So we're talking about something that was obsessed by throughout his life.
The brilliance and breadth of Leonardo's notebooks is astonishing. His ideas seem to predict our modern age, making Leonardo much more than a Renaissance scientist for many. His dream of human flight include a helicopter-like machine and a parachute.
fascination with water led to ambitious civil engineering proposals. And he conceived an intriguing self-propelled machine that seems part automobile, part early robot. But could any of these inventive designs have actually worked?
Leonardo is, of course, a great artist, but he's also a great scientist, and I would argue a great engineer.
The geometry is stunning.
One small sketch in Leonardo's notebooks has so intrigued MIT engineer John Oxendorf that he asked his graduate student, Carly Bast, to bring 21st century engineering rigor to see if Leonardo's 16th century idea would in fact stand.
There is a historical reason for this, because you see it in the drawing, right?
Yeah, these two are interacting.
In 1502, the year before starting the Mona Lisa, Leonardo proposed to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire a bridge in Constantinople 5 times longer than any other span at the time. His plan for this ambitious project, sketched upside down in a small notebook, offers few details, yet just enough for Bast.
Leonardo provided 4 measurements, but he provided 2 sketches. At first it seems like a rough sketch, but as I dug into it, I realized there was a reason for every decision and every line. There was a lot of thought put into the force distribution, and it wasn't just aesthetic. It was engineering.
And to test that engineering, Bast and her colleagues have built a scale model of the bridge with a state-of-the-art 3D printer.
Before 3D printing came along, we'd have to try to build that bridge as close as we could to the full scale, because you couldn't reliably get the geometry quite right.
Leonardo's stone bridge would have been 500 times the size of this model, but the physics are exactly the same.
We have the bridge and we have the mold that's holding it up. The first piece should be easy to take off.
Piece by piece, she removes the styrofoam, a modern-day stand-in for the wooden scaffolding used in Leonardo's day.
This is more like heart surgery than bridge construction.
Finally, the last support is removed. And Leonardo's stone bridge stands.
The geometry is aesthetically beautiful, and the fact that this is standing on its own tells us that it was feasible.
Leonardo's bridge even stays up when they simulate an earthquake.
Stop. Oh my God. It is moved by 30 feet, and the arch still stands.
The bridge does eventually collapse, but only after being moved the equivalent of 50.
Leonardo has the artistic ability, and he also has that scientific knowledge and that engineering capability where he can create things that are beautiful and structurally sound.
Bast clearly had to fill in some details to get from this sketch to this model. And we don't know if the bridge could have been built with the wooden scaffold of the day.
And he also shows...
But she has shown Leonardo got the basic physics right.
What's extraordinary is the ideas that he was coming up with more than 500 years ago. We're still trying to understand.
Now, in the second clip, we're looking more directly at what's the science that underlies the Mona Lisa. And this clip starts with making a simple point that other painters of the day rendered face figures with hard outlines, and that one of Da Vinci's most special techniques, called sfumato, or smoke, involved as much as up to 30 layers of translucent oils, so that the outlines are this elusive quality to them, which applies to her smile. Uncertain, if you like. So
Unquestionably, the most famous example of Leonardo's sfumato is that enigmatic smile of the Mona Lisa.
Just look
what he observed in the three-dimensional world. But in order to get the skin just right, he had to go deeper, to the muscles and tendons.
Because they contain a lot of bacteria, and even after damage,
Many of the drawings from Leonardo's messy dissections today live on in the most refined of places. Windsor Castle, just outside of London. Steps away from where Prince Harry and Meghan Markle pose for their wedding photos. Martin
Well, what most interested Leonardo was the structure, the machinery of the body. And this particular drawing is one of the finest examples of Leonardo trying to understand how the shoulder works purely in mechanical terms. There's no mystery of the body. The body is a machine that can be looked at and analysed in purely objective terms.
The beauty of Leonardo's drawings is undeniable. But in light of all that we've learned with the help of tools like the MRI, did he get it right?
if I were asked to grade his anatomical drawings, they would go from A to F. His drawing of the muscles, of things that he was directly observing and giving functional sense to, those I would give an A+. In terms of some of the organs,
one of Leonardo's most ambitious anatomical drawings is called It is considered a masterpiece. But for Van Houten, it's a bit of a mess.
The feature I went to right away are strange structures flying out from the sides of the uterus. They reminded me of carrots.
These strange sort of horn-like structures are ligaments observed by Leonardo in a cow. And he assumed that all mammals have the same structure. Leonardo is sort of feeling his way into a field that had never been illustrated before.
Leonardo's groundbreaking dissections certainly informed his art. He returned to this painting, St. Jerome, after 20 years, revising the neck to accurately portray the muscle beneath. He did not revisit one of his earliest paintings, Ginevra da Benci, and it shows in what has been called the flatness of her face. But by the time of the Mona Lisa, Leonardo's knowledge of anatomy is beautifully convincing. One intriguing page of Leonardo's notebooks shows several illustrations of human lips in exaggerated expressions, done from dissections.
And it shows how each muscle and each nerve affects the lip. And at the very top is this tiny, faint sketch. And you see the first sketch of what will be the smile of the Mona Lisa.
Anatomy and his painting technique explain in part how Leonardo infused the Mona Lisa with a lifelike quality. But to complete the illusion, he needed to explore
among the many aspects in which Leonardo was using his knowledge as a scientist to become a better painter is optics. And optics is called by Leonardo perspectiva, perspective.
It's basic geometry, because when you have an object with parallel lines, they will seem to vanish into a point, which is called a vanishing point.
Leonardo was fascinated by many aspects of how we perceive our world. He even studied the composition of air to determine how atmosphere affects the appearance of objects in the distance.
Leonardo is trying to capture the complexity of the world. But how can you paint something that you cannot see, like the transparency of air?
Leonardo not only looked at mathematical perspective, he looked at how color changes, the sharpness of something changes as you get further away from it.
And did Leonardo perception, the greatest illusion of all?
She's looking out, and her smile is a reaction by arrival of someone. The figure painting tries to establish.
The great artists know how to draw in, but not to tell you what to think. They offer the tea.
The ambiguity of Mona Lisa's smile is indeed part of her allure. How did Leonardo pull that effect off? That is a question that intrigued neurophysiologist Margaret Livingstone. She studies the human visual system, how our eyes and brain operate together to make sense of the world.
As a neurophysiologist, I learn a lot from artists because they study how we see. I study how we see. A lot of good art takes advantage of the computations your brain makes by exaggerating.
Human vision is among the best in the animal kingdom. The center of our retina is packed with special photoreceptors that enable us to see details or sharpness. But away from the center, toward the periphery, those photoreceptors do not exist. We can see movement, but not detail.
Okay, now I want you to close your eyes. I'm going to put up two versions of the Mona Lisa, one accurate and one distorted.
To illustrate, Livingstone enlists her colleague Peter to see if he can spot a fake using just his peripheral vision.
Okay, briefly open your eyes and look at the yellow spot and close them right away. And point to which is the accurate reproduction. Open your eyes and see whether you chose the correct one.
Peter got only one of four Mona Lisas right. And Livingstone said that's not unusual.
Most people don't know how bad peripheral vision is, because as soon as something happens in their peripheral vision, they look at it and then they bring the high resolution part of their visual system onto it.
In fact, our eyes are constantly moving, 3 times a second, filling in the details. The effect got Livingstone thinking. Could this explain why the Mona Lisa sometimes seems to be smiling and sometimes not? Using a photo app, she blurs the image, like in our peripheral vision.
So I filtered the image in such a way that it would look like what you would see to your peripheral vision, knowing what I know about processing.
The result?
She's grinning from ear to ear.
As you look at the Mona Lisa, your eye moves around the painting. When you look away from her mouth, it enters your peripheral vision, and Mona Lisa appears to smile. But look directly at the mouth, and the smile vanishes.
You get the idea. It's a lovely film. In the final 10 minutes, I just want to talk about the other really provocative show. Da Vinci air date, by the way, is November 13th, but on before then is a show called Look Who's Driving, which is about a truly mind-boggling look at the very rapid development of self-driving autonomous cars. And the show revolves around two big experiments. One is Uber's rollout of testing of autonomous vehicles in a number of U.S. cities: Phoenix, Pittsburgh, San Francisco, and Toronto. And it was really being rolled out, the system, on a very ambitious scale until the world's first fatality happened in March 2018. And the first clip here is going to cover the details of that accident. Now, I read a lot about autonomous vehicles, the future of the world, and yet it really, when you really hear the details of this accident, it kind of brings home the, are these systems ready for prime time? And the answer is almost certainly not. Now, the claims that are put around them, well, I'm going to wait for the second clip because there are potential benefits from technology, but also potential risks. And you'll see in this first clip, the first accident, you'll get a real sense of part of the problems.
Should we do a simple test first?
In university robotics labs.
Yes.
And the startups that spin out of them. A growing army of engineers keeps improving sensors and software. The big car manufacturers take notice, and they too enter the fray.
Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to CES.
They're betting that driverless cars are about to become a huge global business.
The autonomous vehicle market is supposed to be an enormous market in the future. Estimates say that in the mid-2030s, the market could be worth a few trillion US dollars with a T in there.
That potential payday brings Uber to Arizona, whose flat landscape and sunny weather are ideal for testing self-driving cars. Uber sees eliminating its paid drivers as a key to future profitability. But the March 2018 crash in Tempe casts a dark shadow on the future of self-driving cars. Uber suspends all testing on public roads. The National Transportation Safety Board launches an investigation. Why did neither the computer system nor the safety driver stop the car?
The Uber crash in Tempe wasn't really about the maturity of the technology. We all knew the self-driving car technology wasn't ready to deploy. That's why they were doing testing. The significance of the Uber crash was that the human safety driver failed to prevent the crash.
In the months after the crash, the NTSB and Tempe police released new details about what happened that night. The interior camera reveals that Rafaela Vasquez is not watching the road for nearly 7 of the 22 minutes before the crash, including about 5 of the last 6 seconds. The police discover that the whole time the car is moving, she is streaming an episode of a singing competition on her phone. Vasquez denies watching the video or even looking at her phone. She says she was just checking the control panel, but she does not step on the brake until after the car strikes Hertzberg.
39-year-old cyclist.
The NTSB findings also point to flaws in the self-driving system The sensors actually detect Hertzberg 6 seconds before impact, but the system doesn't alert the safety driver. It's not designed to.
So even though their sensors had detected this target, there was a potentially hazardous situation, they made the decision to not give any of that information to the test driver. I can't imagine why.
And the computer doesn't decide emergency braking is needed until 1.3 seconds before impact. But even then, the car doesn't brake because Uber has disabled the Volvo's factory-installed emergency braking system. Uber wants to avoid jerky rides caused by unnecessary braking for harmless objects.
So the net result of that is they took a safe production vehicle and turned it into an unsafe prototype that caused the pedestrian to be killed.
Uber tells the NTSB that it's the safety driver's job to correct any mistakes made by the self-driving system.
Now, while many people look at the safety driver in that vehicle as perhaps the villain, the real issue is the system that safety driver was put into. They were put into a system ripe for failure, where the expectations of failure were far lower than the actual probabilities. Perhaps because the computer scientists and the engineers building these systems don't all appreciate the complexities that human behavior brings to the system.
Uber declined to participate in this film.
In the second clip, we look at the other big player and in the self-driving car push, and that is Elon Musk and his Tesla operation. And since 2015, Tesla's been testing tens of thousands of cars equipped with his Autopilot system. It's 3 or 4 years ahead of its competitors in terms of its capabilities. But in order to get that lead, Musk has gone for relatively cheap radar and camera equipment, not the more accurate LiDAR system. So there's been trade-offs in doing it. And the claims are that these extensive testing has been done, that the crash rate is now 1 crash per 2.87 million miles on these experimentally fitted Teslas. And that compares to a normal crash rate of about 1 crash for every 400,000 miles. So potentially, the argument is, these could save, because these are done by systems that don't fall asleep, that don't look at their cell phones when they should be looking at the road, that you could save, according to Musk, as much as 40,000 lives a year with these systems. But Tesla, too, had its own fatality, and it's
in the MIT study, like Taylor Ogan, who are much more trusting of automation. He owns a Tesla equipped with software called Autopilot.
Actually traded my first car in to get Autopilot so that the car could drive itself. It helps you stay in your lane and follow the car, the distance of the car in front of you, and you really don't have to touch anything. It's awesome. I love it. I swear by it.
Alright, here we go. Alright.
Tesla's founder and CEO, Elon Musk, has long touted Autopilot as a step along the road to his goal of full autonomy.
No hands, no feet, nothing. It's a combination of radar, camera with image recognition, and ultrasonic sensors that's integrated with maps and real-time traffic.
But for now, the Tesla system is still level 2, which means it requires just as much driver attention as a regular car. So the company has been criticized for choosing the name Autopilot.
It's a nice, catchy sounding name, but Autopilot certainly has a misleading connotation. It suggests that the pilot of the car is in the program, in the computer, and not in the driver of the vehicle.
But Musk claims that the name is not misleading.
Autopilot is what they have in airplanes, things where there's still an expectation that there'll be a pilot. So if the onus is on the pilot to make sure that the autopilot is doing the right thing. We're not asserting that the car is capable of driving in the absence of driver oversight.
Yet when he uses autopilot, Taylor Ogan feels free to look away from the road from time to time.
I'm not a distracted driver, but I definitely do things that I think older people who don't trust technology wouldn't do. I'm definitely on my phone a lot more, texting, reading articles when the car is driving itself.
I'm actually gonna test this autopilot thing, bro. So I can eat food! There's no life. Look at this!
Some early autopilot users push things a lot further and show off their exploits on YouTube.
Oh my, that's a sharp turn. I'm alive. Okay, good.
They're just extreme examples of people placing too much trust in partially automated cars. A problem that in 2016 leads to tragedy.
Geez. Car's doing it all itself. What am I going to do with my hands down here?
39-year-old Joshua Brown is a particularly enthusiastic early adopter of Tesla's Autopilot. He loves to make YouTube videos showing what Autopilot can do.
So the camera up here is what's
and Tesla stresses how
react so quickly that if any idea would take control very, very quickly like this.
On May 7th, 2016, near the town of Williston, Florida, Joshua Brown is cruising east on Route 27A, a four-lane divided highway that has numerous intersections. He's driving at 74 miles per hour with autopilot switched on. As Brown nears an intersection, a truck driver prepares to make a left turn across his path to yield. It begins its turn with Brown's about 1,000 feet away. Brown now has about 10 seconds to avoid a collision. Records show that he is not using it. He does nothing. Trailer, killing. Between the truck driver using autopilot. In 2016, in China, a driver named Gao Yaning crashes into a road sweeper.
We had a Tesla crash in California.
In 2018, in California, Walter Huang dies when his Tesla crashes into a
Being set on autopilot.
This deadly Tesla crash raising new questions tonight. The roof of the car.
Banner is killed in Florida when his Tesla hits a truck. Tesla declined to participate in this film.
Just the update that very recently Musk announced that that by next year, full self-driving capabilities will be delivered by over-the-air automatic update to over 1 million Tesla cars that will be out on the road, and they will operate reliably, and the driver can fall asleep if they want. This is what he's putting out there. So fascinating piece of controversy here. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this snapshot of what we do, and if you have any questions, stay behind or ask me or whatever. Thank you. Yeah.
How do you know how many people watch the program on television?
Oh, it's this voodoo science of ratings that nobody really. It really, it's conducted by people that do samples and sample households, and they have to indicate their preferences, and it's black magic. Nobody really believes it, but it's also like the currency that broadcasters use. And even though PBS is now down to fractions of a point, sort of this measurement error. So as you can see, it's not my field.
I mean, you said you had 40,000 viewers at one point, and I just wondered how you came up with that number.
Well, it's sampling households. It is kind of self-reporting. That's my understanding anyway. So, yeah.
How do you choose the music for your productions?
Well, it depends on the budget. If it's a co-production that we have to produce for a relatively cheap budget, we will use off-the-shelf library music. But in most cases, we get a composer who will do a special score. I think that's true in the car crash movie, Autopilot movie. Right.
And how about the narrator? Sometimes the narrator sounds.
Oh yes,
very
vexed issue. Yeah. For years, Nova has this voice of God, which I find completely off-putting. But most recently, we've been experimenting with fresher, younger voices, and it's really bizarre that the female voice is somehow considered less powerful or doesn't cut through in the same way that a male voice does. I think it's a profound prejudice myself, and it's just what our ears are used to. But it's another with us. I mean, interestingly, there's very clear difference between really good professional narrators, and the reason why you hear the same voice over and over again is that we will go to the really top person like Jay Saunders, who's a Shakespearean actor, and he is completely directable, and he will the exact same. So if you say, "Oh, Jay, that was great," and I've been in a narration, he will just do it. Next take will be perfect. Crapshoot. Everything, all the other mix we have, trying to get that balance right. Ease some of the risk, and we can pool our experience. The Volcano. Oh, for me, um, um, every subject that we do, sort of, it's bluffing my way through. Jay, yes. But to writing all these best-selling manuals for, you know, idiots' guides to Mac systems and so on. Anyway, the height of doing a series with him, I'll never forget this one time that he came into the office and explained that he has 1 million followers on Twitter, and he needs for the night. Doesn't bother going, you know, he just puts out a tweet, and one of his fans will come through and sort of whatever he wants. So it's a bizarre system. So American across the North Atlantic, the theory has been discredited, and a theory that was recently used by white Europeans that were the ancestors of Native Americans. So that I would do over, and it got the highest highest ratings during that season of any subject, because people are fascinated by the mystery of where the first Americans came from. And it is indeed a great, challenging piece of science that's still being worked out. Yeah.
You take funding from the Koch brothers, is that correct?
Well, it's going to go away. And yeah, and it's...
Is that a conflict? Is any of your funding?
Oh yeah, I get emails, or used to get emails every other day practically, from people, rightly protesting the policies. But the assumption is that editorial pressure on us, and nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, we have done a show related to climate change in science every single season of NOVA for the last 7 years. And a year ago, we got so fed up with the perception that we weren't dealing with climate change that we pulled out all the stops and did a real 2-hour primer on the basics of global warming called The Weather Machine, which, again, this is one of the very best programs we've ever done. We got incredible feedback from all over. And the reason why we took 2 years of internal discussion of how to do this project in a way that would not be seen as partisan or alienating and all the rest of it. And we did it by essentially introducing it through the story of a former evangelical fundamentalist guy, weatherman, and he simply documented his own kind of conversion experience, is not the right word, his own realization that the physics was not lying, that he could not continue to ignore this, even though he was a fundamentalist and believed in the line that, God wouldn't let this happen to his creation. And because he told his story so sympathetically at the beginning, it was a way to start introducing, well, what are the physics? But you can't just tell people the facts and expect that this, Judy, and expect them to get it. You have to acknowledge the other point of view. You have to invite people to the table and not ridicule them and say, yeah, we understand your argument, but have you considered this? And that's, sorry, I'm rambling on here, yeah.
Do you have a process for generating ideas, or is it something fairly random?
It's fairly random. I mean, we were all we have this little in-house culture, and we do post things to each other regularly. My breakfast routine is looking at my New York Times or wherever, feed from all over. But tremendous number of ideas come from freelance independent producers that we work with, because somebody's pointing a gun at their heads. If they don't come up with a good idea, they starve. It's a miserable profession, because you're only as good as your last movie, and last documentary is very poorly paid. So the people like Doug Hamilton, Doug is actually independently wealthy. So he's one of the few neurotic, brilliant, what am I saying? He's one of the few very charming, open, secure people there who's really developed his art to a high pitch, because he doesn't have to worry about, where the next... I'm being a little insulting to... but it is a very tough profession, and you have to come up... It gets more and more competitive for those producers out there to come up with good ideas. Yeah, it's time we should wrap up. Maybe one last thought.
People say that some people citing sort of doubt science in certain areas.
Yeah.
Do you think there's ever that there can be made a distinction between different types of science and the degree of doubt that you can have? For example, people doubt climate science, which is, to me, doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it seems to me that there's too much faith in the science of human behavior, which I thought was good that you challenged.
Yeah.
That one with the car was a good challenge. I didn't expect that, actually. I haven't seen Nova in a while.
Yeah.
Do you see the distinction between the two? And I think there's too much faith in things like brain scans.
Absolutely, and we have done. We're not afraid to go after loosey-goosey science. In fact, we do tend to stick away from the softer psychological stuff, just because it is can be a mushier mushier end of science. On the other hand, we don't want to do hard physics all the time, because that too has its own delusions of that we have all the answers in cosmology, so yeah. But it's a very good point. Yeah. Thank you.